Symmetrical book stacking. Look at it, just like the Philadelphia mass turbulence of 1947. You're right, Ray. No human being would stack books this way. We're talking about fire and brimstone raining from the sky, human sacrifices, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. And let's not forget, Ray, when someone asks you if you are a god, you say yes. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Today, celebrating the 30th anniversary of the release of the original Ghostbusters. That's what I'm going to be taking a look at. Right on. So Ghostbusters was released in 1984, directed by Ivan Reitman, well known for Stripes, Twins, and Kindergarten Cop. It was written by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis, with a story by Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. That was written by Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and Ivan Reitman, with a story by Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. The film stars the late, great Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Sigourney Weaver, Rick Moranis, Annie Potts, and Will Arthurton. The basic plot of the film is three relatively brilliant but misunderstood teachers of various science backgrounds as well as parapsychology backgrounds get fired from their teaching jobs at the university where everyone thinks that they're a big joke. Well, in the meantime, they have been spending all their free time investigating paranormal activity, and just before their firing have had their first encounter with a real ghost. This then prompts them to set out and create the first paranormal investigation and extermination business. So they get started, and things are running a little slow, and it really just takes some time for things to pick up, because eventually ghosts start bursting out everywhere in New York. And this movie's old enough, and enough people have seen it, and it's well enough loved. I don't think I really need to go into the details of the plot. If you haven't seen the movie, it's fantastic, and check it out. Absolutely. And if you haven't seen it, you don't want me to tell you too much about the plot anyway, because it'll ruin it, because it really is a great movie. But instead, I thought I'd talk about a few other things that maybe are a little bit less known about the movie, and then kind of go into why the movie is what it is and why it's lasted as long as it's lasted. The first thing that I'd like to kind of talk about is the original concept and story for Ghostbusters, which, as I said, was written by Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi just about a year, maybe two, before his passing. And in their original version, he was going to be playing, John Belushi would play Peter Venkman, and Dan Aykroyd would be Raymond Stantz, the character that he plays. But as opposed to what was then modern-day New York, where ghosts are still kind of something that people aren't sure about, the way that they were going to go is slightly futuristic New York, where ghosts are everywhere, and ghosts have become an epidemic to the point that the Ghostbusters aren't just one little firehouse full of guys. It's actually like more of a combination of exterminators and firemen and police. And they have stations all over the city. And the story they were really going to tell was the introduction of Ernie Hudson's character, who they didn't know at the time Ernie Hudson would be playing, but Winston Zeddemore, into this kind of group of kind of very seasoned veterans of doing this, who were kind of the worn-down gunman prototypes. It's actually the point in which Winston Zeddemore comes in to the movie. The actual film, Ghostbusters, is originally where the movie was going to start, but with a slightly different world around it. And basically, in that version of the story, the very first thing you would see is the first creature you would see, or ghost you would see, was actually what ends up in this movie being not the big bad, but the kind of henchman, or like the big battle, so to speak, of the movie. And it was just the first thing out of the bat, and it was one of many, 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 many huge, over-the-top, kind of gargantuan beasts. They were kind of going for this like modern-day, almost Clash of the Titans kind of thing. Then after John Belushi's passing, Dan Aykroyd still felt that the movie should get made. He still felt that it was a good idea, and he still felt that even without John, that John would really want this story to be told, because they had spent so much time and had so much fun just kind of playing with the ideas in the world. They were both really into the paranormal and into science fiction. John Belushi really isn't thought of as that kind of guy. I mean, because he is so funny. He was so funny and wacky and kind of over the top. But underneath that, he really was an intelligent guy who liked science fiction for the ideas of humanity it could explore, not for the far-off world you could go to. And so at this point, Dan Aykroyd started trying to get it made, and it came to Ivan Reitman, who they had worked together on not Dan Aykroyd specifically, but they'd kind of worked together on a couple of other projects. And at that point, Ivan Reitman came in, also bringing Harold Ramis with him. And those guys spent a lot of time in Martha's Vineyard at Dan Aykroyd's cabin, putting into work what would become known as Ghostbusters. And they probably spent about 6 months working on the script before they got it ready and started getting it out there. So that's kind of the origins, where it came from and how it became what it was going to be. But John Belushi's influence on the film doesn't stop there. One of the, I suppose, little-known or maybe not so well-known facts of the movie is that every kid's favorite character, Slimer, is actually an homage to John Belushi, which sounds weird because the character's disgusting and grotesque and very childish and immature. But when you think about it, that is the comedy kind of persona that John Belushi created for himself in many of his works, especially if you think of things like Animal House, and really Slimer represents excess, which John Belushi wielded like the most deadly weapon, eventually having it, of course, take his life a few years later in the form of a drug overdose. But it really is great that these people took all the things that made their friend remarkable to the public eye, and then also added their own personal emotions. Because if you watch the way Slimer's dealt with in the movie, he's not dealt with in the same manner as most of the other ghosts. He definitely has a unique personality and a playful personality, a trickster's personality. And especially once you go through and you get to the second movie with Slimer's reemergence, and then you look at the cartoon where Slimer even becomes kind of a part. And of course, these main guys had nothing to do really with the cartoon, the real Ghostbusters. But Slimer and kind of Belushi's legacy and that kind of the emotions attached to what otherwise a lot of people would perceive as kind of a gross character are very strong in the movie. And that really is a testament to how much these guys loved Belushi and how much of an effect they felt that he had on the general public in terms of the way that comedy was going in film. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is just kind of some of the reasons why this movie, as opposed to some of these other similar kinds of movies, why this one has lasted, whereas others fail to last. This movie has big special effects, it has over-the-top characters, and all those things you'd want out of the kind of movie. But most movies that do this, and especially today, all these movies that kind of try to copy the Ghostbusters formula, one of the big things that they miss out on is that Ghostbusters, for the most part, starts as a very real story with characters that seem very real. And what they do is throughout this movie, with each paranormal encounter, with each introduction of a new character, it kind of gives you these stepping stones of logic, where when you begin off, you can accept a very small kind of ghost the way that you've read about it in books or seen it on TV before. You can accept that pretty easily because it's already part of the collective subconscious of what a representation of a ghost should be. But by the time you get to the end of the movie, there's almost none of that kind of an idea left. And what they've done really cleverly is both the human characters and the way that they interact with paranormal activity, as well as each individual paranormal act, kind of gives you a little boost where you're like, you know what, I know that's not real, but they've given me enough that I can buy into that in this world. And this really culminates in this kind of montage of the Ghostbusters kicking butt and taking names. It really comes to a really nice, I suppose, a crescendo, where like you're now fully involved, you're fully invested, and you're fully immersed in the world of the Ghostbusters. And from this point on, you're pretty much going to take anything that they give you within those parameters that they've set. You're going to kind of take that. You're going to be able to accept it as being real to these characters and to this world. And even after that, the kind of stepping stones continue. A lot of times in modern movies, they want to just kind of smack you with the big effect. And there's been nothing in the movie that would indicate that the world that they're showing you could support something like this. But Ivan Reitman was really, really careful about not only in the helping of the script, but in the editing and in the final cut and the special effects and everything to ensure that the movie really did start off as kind of what you could think would be a normal Ivan Reitman, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis kind of style comedy, and then kind of slowly lets you into what would become the phenomenon of the Ghostbuster world. And again, it's like just the kind of the way that they mix the tone as well adds to this, you know. A lot of movies now, people are like, oh yeah, you know, they do it all. They got comedy and they got drama and they've got action. But what's really, really great, and I mean, other movies have done this and they've done it really well, but from my childhood specifically, I can't remember a movie that affected me like this movie did because of the way that they mixed the tone, where they gave you a scene that could be a really scary scene. And to a kid, it was a really scary scene. But then at the same time, they would take the characters, not the situation, but the characters that they had developed as very real human-like characters and put them into that situation and allow their reactions to be what propels the comedy. Therefore, you're not losing the tension of the suspense that they've set up, but at the same time, you're still able to laugh and you're able to kind of relieve yourself moment by moment. And then they, of course, get to the big scare of that scene, which is always also either undercut or laden with a really great bit of comedic timing or, you know, a really great joke. Furthermore, you know, I just want... This is that movie, like, from a lot of people, like, the first movie you really remember an actor for, that's who they are to you in a lot of ways. It's like they'll do some great stuff and you'll recognize them, but if you were to see them on the street, your first reaction would be, that's the character, not the actor. And for me, this movie really did that. The other way that this movie really kind of worked fantastically is in its merchandising. You know, they created merchandising that the Ghostbusters symbol on the plain white t-shirt, which is still sold today in stores all over the place, isn't something that's going to age. You know, they picked a symbol, kind of an image that would endure through time and through style. You know, it's even today when they're talking about doing a new Ghostbusters movie, every time there's been concept art or anything like that, that logo doesn't change. It's kind of something for people kind of my age and maybe a few years younger and a few years older. It's this image that's branded on your mind. And to this day, there's not a, you know, again, people of my age around that area, if anyone in a room says, who are you going to call? They just turn around, Ghostbusters, of course, you know? So anyway, so as I was saying, this is the 30-year anniversary of the film, and this Friday it's going to be re-released in theaters, actually. So anyone who kind of wants to take that out should, because there's a lot of things that on a small screen you kind of miss. But on a big screen, well, of course, they're remastering it, so there's going to be a lot of things like wires that you see in the original that won't be there and stuff like that. But there's a lot of little great in-jokes. For anyone who goes to see this on the big screen, take a look at Sigourney Weaver's fridge when they open it, at the names of some of the products there, including when she brings her groceries home. Notice that the bag of marshmallows she has is, in fact, Stay Puft marshmallows. Which will come into play greatly later in the movie. The movie also has some great cameos from people like Martin Short, Larry King. Let's see, who else was there? Oh, I can't remember the gentleman's name who plays the mayor, but he's played the mayor of New York in more movies than any other actor, apparently. I so wish I could remember his name at this moment, but it's, for the life of me, I can't.
Well, wait till they put the chip in your brain, then you'll be able to retain it instantly, right?
Right, I suppose so. But I guess the last kind of thing I wanted to go into is based, and I'm not going to really go into the second movie or the cartoon all that much right now, just, you know, didn't really prepare for it, and on top of that, you know, it's like the second movie, I love it, it's fantastic, but it's not quite the first one. And as much as I loved the cartoon as a child, it really doesn't hold up by modern day standards, although it's really funny to see Peter Venkman have the same voice as the cartoon Garfield, and then years later, the actor who played Peter Venkman voiced Garfield. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. But anyway, that original storyline I was talking about, over the last few years, and now I really doubt it'll ever happen with the passing of Harold Ramis, but they've been talking about doing a third installment of Ghostbusters, which I've always been for, and kind of it seems that original idea of John Belushi's and Dan Aykroyd's always seems to be what they keep coming back to in terms of what this third movie would be. And I feel that really says something about the original material. The fact that, 30 years later, anytime someone's like, well, what would we do next for Ghostbusters? It's not actually this new, of course they're adding all these new ideas to it, and they're bringing in younger actors, and the original actors would be vets kind of stationed in this, veterans of the Ghostbuster unit stationed in this firehouse. But all of the actual basics of it really go back to the original idea that Belushi and Aykroyd had. And over 30 years, if one idea, and even when they did the second movie, when they talked about the idea for the story, that was kind of the idea originally, that there would be multiple Ghostbuster houses kind of doing that same thing. So I really think that even though the movie that eventually came out was not that movie, it still has a lot of those pieces in it, and I still think that 30 years later, that's really a testament to not only the brilliance, but the care and love that went into that original idea. As I said, Aykroyd pursued this because he felt that there was a lot of his friend in it, and he wanted to see that put on the screen. And, so I just wanted to share that with y'all, that deep, deep, deep in the soul of Ghostbusters, John Belushi lives. And I really think that has a lot to do, the same way the Blues Brothers has lived and a lot of the other kind of Belushi performances have lived. I think that essence at the core that made all those great comedic minds gather around it is what has allowed it to endure to this day and even keep going. Because everybody, fans, creators, they all want it to keep going.
Maybe we could feature the ghost of John Belushi.
Yeah, like I was saying a little bit earlier, that's kind of who Slimer's supposed to represent in those movies. It's kind of taking all the elements of John Belushi, both what the actors and creators and people who knew him loved about him, and then giving him the same visual image that he had kind of set up for himself in other movies like Animal House, kind of this disgusting, slobbering, excessively partying kind of guy turned into a ghost. And
that's eventually what happened.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier.
He partied himself to death.
As I said, Belushi wielded excess like a deadly weapon, and eventually it claimed his own life.
Yes, I remember when a friend of mine called me out for one day after work and said, John Belushi died. You just don't. Now I guess I've had enough, been through enough celebrity deaths that I'm a little more inured to them, but at the time it was quite a shock.
Yeah, and even now, as with Robin Williams passing, it's like, I think people fail to understand and comprehend that a lot of people who feel the need to devote their life to making other people laugh are themselves deeply unhappy people who are doing it in a lot of sense, not only to make other people laugh, but to make themselves laugh, to make themselves feel like this world that they can't stand or that they feel so horrible about that they're making it a little bit better. And, that can really only go on for so long.
Yeah, well, that's both interesting and depressing.
Good way
like so many things in life. Well, thank you.